hurt almost doesn't even feel like an adequate word for this, because betrayal and some of the physical struggles you've gone through, are so much deeper than just, oh, that hurt my feelings kind of thing. That's how we use that term. So, I loved how you even set this up with us to say, like, it goes way beyond hurt.
Welcome to the Glass House. We've been walking through the emotions this season, and today we're going to talk about hurt. And we have on the show Cynthia, who works here at Lifeway. She was a pastor's wife for years, a speaker, a women's ministry leader, and she's done freelance work with us. Well, her whole life blew up a few years ago when something came public about her husband that she never saw coming. He was a pastor, and in a single day, the entire reality of her life came dashing to the ground. There's insecurity in marriage, and it affects ministry without a doubt. And Cynthia experienced the catastrophe that a lot of us think about of what would we do if our entire reality collapsed, our marriage fell apart. Where do we go next? How do we put our life back together?
We talk about this in the episode, but what I liked so much is that she almost feels like the term hurt minimizes just the extreme betrayal that she felt. And so if anyone out here is listening and hears us talk about hurt and you think about, oh, well, my friend said this and it hurt my feelings, like that's not the kind of hurt we're talking about.
Yeah,
just extreme trauma.
This is trauma, and it's the kind that takes a lifetime to work through, and even then you're never done.
Well, and we talked about in the episode, it's not linear. You go up and down into different seasons and stages of grief.
I want you to hear, Lynley and I both, we want you to hear her story, and we want you to notice how she's been very intentional about seeking out healing, friendship, and even food as a way
music.
to...
No, it's music.
Music, all
Yeah.
kinds of things. How does she find her joy again? This episode's for you. Welcome to the Glass House. Lynley, I just recorded a solo episode without you, and I got to tell you, it was pretty boring.
It's not as good without me.
There was no sass.
No,
I know, sorry. I mean,
no
like
sass.
Christian fire, passion.
Thank you.
No, I mean, it really wasn't as fun. But I thought the guest was great, so that helped.
That's
but today you're here, and we have Cynthia here. Cynthia's on staff at Lifeway and helped me write my first Bible study since becoming a president, and we just got to do this project together. And in the middle of that, Cynthia, you were really kind to share your story with me, and I thought it was just so important to have you on as we talk about hurt. So just a reminder to all you listening, we've been walking through the different emotions in this season, and this week we want to talk about hurt.
I thought it was so interesting in your email as we were prepping for this, how you mentioned that hurt almost doesn't even feel like an adequate word for this, because betrayal and some of the physical struggles you've gone through, are so much deeper than just, oh, that hurt my feelings kind of thing. That's how we use that term. So, I loved how you even set this up with us to say, like, it goes way beyond hurt, but let's tackle it under this category.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we have some questions, Cynthia. Why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, what you do at Lifeway, and just introduce yourself, and then we're going to jump right in.
I've been writing for Lifeway for like 20 years as a freelancer, but went full-time 2.5 years, almost 3 years ago. I write remotely and love it so much, obviously, because I've been doing it for decades. But yeah, work on a great team, short-term studies team. Got to partner with you to produce your first study, and which is great. Everybody should buy it. And yeah, so that's who I am. My story kind of like, I became a Christian when I was 7 years old, and knew that I would be serving in vocational ministry of some sort since the time that I was 16, when I sensed God's call in that direction, and then served in ministry my whole adult life. I was married to a pastor. We met in college on a spring break mission trip to Phoenix, Arizona. So from the start, we were partners in ministry together. Went off to seminary. I was teaching school, and he was a seminary student, and then left there and was able to, God just really allowed us to work in a lot of really great churches with great people who love the Lord and people who loved us really, really well. We have 2 kids, and they are young adults now, but when they were babies, I quit teaching school and started writing freelance. That's when that started. And also I was teaching a lot at my church. And so God started opening up doors for me to speak at women's events, and really just had some super unique opportunities. I got one time invited by the Queen Mother of the Toro Kingdom in Uganda to come speak on the palace grounds, teach there, a women's conference. She was attending an event that I was speaking at in the States. And afterwards she came up and she said, I want the women of my country to hear that message. Would you come? And so I did, and rode across the whole country in a royal caravan and spoke on the palace grounds. And I mean, God opened my eyes to a lot of things that trip. The gospel in different cultures, and what he's doing in all of our lives. So not long after that, I started a nonprofit ministry. So that's part of my ministry experience too. I was trying to meet some felt needs of women's ministry leaders by providing a multi-church retreat, and I was leading women's mission trips, partnering with North American Mission Board church planters in Canada. We were doing events, really, the Canadian National Baptist Convention got wind of it and started allowing us to do that in every province. We were about to go to New Brunswick when COVID hit.
So you have a vast ministry experience, and life took a big turn for you.
It did, yeah.
So talk a little about that.
So right after COVID, 2021, we had just moved in January of 2021. He had accepted, my husband had accepted a position as associate pastor in a church in a different city. And so we moved at that time. We were empty nesters, and he was super excited about getting to go in that capacity because he was going to preach 18 times a year and lead staff meetings. They were giving him opportunity to do all of the things that really filled his heart to do. But 2 weeks after we got there, I actually had a major medical event. I went to the ER one morning when I woke up. I had numbness in my left arm, from the shoulder to my fingertips. And I couldn't shake the sense that I needed to get it checked out. That had happened before, but I'd always gotten up and then worked this. I just figured I slept on it funny. But this time I couldn't shake the sense. I need to go get it checked out. And there was a major weather event that day. People were losing power everywhere. Nobody was on the roads, ice everywhere. But I went to the ER, and because of COVID protocols, I went in by myself, and they whisked me into the CT machine. And a neurologist came later to tell me, she said, well, you haven't had a stroke. That's what they were looking for. Probably the numbness is just pinched nerves, which is what it ended up being, but completely unrelated. What they saw in the CT was that I had some aneurysms, and one of them was really big, and there were a couple of them, size and shape, at a high risk of rupture. And so we had just moved there, and that day sort of marked the whole year. Because I had 4 different procedures that year. I had 2 surgeries. The biggest was a brain surgery, a craniotomy, clipping surgery, which if you've seen even one episode of Grey's Anatomy, you probably know, it's a big deal. My surgeon said 8 out of 10 level of difficulty. I don't know if he was, humble brag or what that was, but it was scary. And I tell all of that because that church, they barely knew me, right? I mean, we had just gotten there, and they loved us so well and were so intentional with us and caring for us through that circumstance. And really, that's kind of a picture. That church was a picture of the reality that we had experienced in every church that God had allowed us to serve in.
So you would say, being a pastor's wife, it was a sweet ride for you. It was not pain after pain, but it was really a lot of good story.
Yes. Yeah. We were partners in ministry, my husband and I. He championed the gifts that he saw in me, even came along on some of those trips and events and served and helped any way that he could. And I was serving in our churches as well, sometimes leading out in women's ministry, other times teaching in different contexts of church life all along the way. And it was good.
That's so important. I know we're going to get to the rest of the story in a second, but Lynley and I have talked about this. Just partnership is so special. And when we can do stuff together in ministry, like getting to do ministry alone is a joy in and of itself. But when you can do it with your spouse, it's just extra special.
I also like to point out on the podcast when people do have a really good experience with the church, because sometimes it can, oh, this was hard and this was hard and this was hard. And it's kind of like there are really great churches out there. You know, I mean, social media does us a disservice, because what you're saying is like you had this experience over and over again. So I'm glad that you prefaced it with that. Like you had a good experience with churches. And then I know that you're going to talk about the real trauma, the real hurt.
Yeah. So far, everything you've said is more about sadness, you know, like how sad it is. You're going through these really tough medical diagnoses. I think you lost your hair.
I did.
I can't imagine how hard that was.
Yeah, they shaved my head on the left side and opened me up and repaired the aneurysms. And it took a while for it. I've let it just keep growing now.
Yeah.
Just
but
let it go.
at some point it went from sadness to hurt.
It did. 7 months after the craniotomy, I was hit with something a whole lot harder than brain surgery ever once thought about being, when some shocking and truly horrific things were revealed about the man that I'd been married to for 32 years. And the way that I found out was that he was arrested one night. So that was really shocking and horrific. It was a sting operation. And a day later, the pastor of our church, his coworker and friend, went and bailed him out with some money that I had given him. And it was then when he came home that he confessed to me finally that he'd been acting out on an addiction for a very long time. And it led him down a really, really dark path. So,
did you have any idea?
I did not. I had known early on. There was a sequence. I mean, there was a process for him. I had known early on that he had struggled with pornography at a time. But we talked about that pretty, periodically. He also had two friends that were holding him accountable. But what none of us knew is that he wasn't ever being honest about the depth of his addiction and things that he was doing besides pornography. And I thought we were past that because, even a month before the arrest, he said, "I'm doing better than ever. It's not a struggle anymore," which wasn't true. And so, it was shocking and traumatic to everyone who knew us. And everyone did know because it was a headline. It was a news story 2 weeks later, which was another kind of hurt. Everybody knew. And so the kids and I were dealing with all of that and trying to process. And he'd lost his job, and I moved out. And the marriage ended in divorce, which was crazy because that's not a word that I ever used or even thought was a possibility. And then suddenly it was the thing that made sense because I knew that he needed to he needed to heal, and he needed help apart from me. And also, it was kind of obvious that the marriage had ended quite some time ago. I just didn't know it.
Well, there's so many different kinds of ways to get hurt. A lot of times on our show we talk about, just the nature of church ministry is that church people can be hurtful, and say things or do things that are, very wounding. But this kind of hurt is betrayal. And it hurts on I'm sure, a whole different level. So it's been how long now?
2.5 years.
2.5 years.
How old were the kids when this happened?
They were 26 and 23.
So I'm leaving Ben out of this for a second. Like mom to mom, if you have raised kids in the church, they've seen their dad as a pastor, this all comes out. Do they stick with the faith, or are they like, this has all been hypocrisy? Like, I can't stay here.
It's a great question, and it's one of the many graces that God has shown us in this. The kids and I have always been super close. We're really, really close now. The oldest is, I'll give you this as an example. When I found out, I called him and I said, I need you to pull over. He was in the car driving. I said, I need you to pull over. He did, and I told him, and he told me later that in that moment, he just started yelling and pounding the steering wheel with his fist, and he said, my first thought was whiskey. My next thought was, nope, because the decision that I make in this moment is going to steer the course of the rest of my life, which is the Holy Spirit in him. My daughter is the younger one, and she was actually flying in at the time of the arrest. She was up in another state at seminary, and she had her seminary experience walked through the year of my aneurysms and then this. And when she graduated last December, she stood up as the student with the highest GPA in the Master of Divinity school. Through those experiences, she did that. I mean, it's just God's grace all over it in so many different ways. And so they have had struggles, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have. But their faith has helped them walk through it and process the hurt like mine has.
Yeah.
Did you stay at the church that had hired him?
No, I moved out pretty quickly.
Yeah. To a different location altogether?
I did. Yes, I went back actually to my hometown and the church that I grew up in. I really felt God calling me there. And it has turned out to be a huge help to me, that place. They've understood it personally. They've gone through something similar, like many churches have. And so they understood, and they were ready to help.
Sometimes in a church, when something like this happens, like betrayal, hurt, the church will kind of abandon the people. Did you feel like they rallied around you?
They rallied around me. They were so kind to me. God had allowed us to form a really tight relationship the previous year. Like I said, they barely knew me when I got there, and then suddenly I'm dealing with all this medical stuff. But in that situation, we really got close. And the women had come to an event that I was doing, one of the nonprofit retreats. And they were so kind to me. Now, he lost his job immediately. But my experience with them continued to be positive. And even today, they still check on me, and yeah.
Did you guys ever really communicate much after he was arrested and all that? Or is it just kind of like, I got to be done?
I was operating out of a state of shock for a while. Had a list of things that needed to be done. I moved out, I was getting the house sold because he had lost his job. One thing after another. And I was also managing some of his things as well, because I was just in this state of shock, and that's what I had always done. So I also was asking every question that popped into my brain. I was wanting to hear every part of it. When all of the list finished and our divorce was finalized, it's not that I haven't talked to him at all, but not much at all. And since he got out of his jail time, we really haven't talked at all.
I'm thinking about all of the people in ministry listening that have been through betrayal or hurt. Obviously, there's likely no one out there that has a story just like yours. But they're probably asking the question of, how do you move forward when your entire world collapses in a single phone call? Even this conversation, Cynthia, as coworkers, I haven't had a chance to have this one with you. I'm interested myself, like, what have been the steps that you've taken to start the journey of healing?
Yeah, part of it was stepping back, for sure. I took a year off. I canceled some contracts where I was going to go speak at different events. I needed at least a year, I knew, to process and be and heal. I didn't know if I was ever going to step back in, but I knew I needed some time to ask that question.
Sure.
I didn't know if anybody would ask ever again. You know, I didn't know. So that was a big piece of it, was stepping back. Also, I want to say this, as part of the healing process that I have pursued, it's more about God's grace in pursuing me, honestly, because he had already tendered so many people to me, and they were praying for me for a whole year. You know, I wasn't sure. I was super aware of my own mortality that year, you know, and I think everybody was. And people were praying for me all over the place, especially the day of my craniotomy. And so the next year when this happened, they were already tender toward me in some ways and praying for me. And so they continued to do that. And I am 100% certain that the only reason why I'm standing today is because of the prayers of God's people. They have continued. I've seen people that have said, God has put you on my heart every single day. And it's taught me a whole lot about the power of prayer. So yeah, that's part of it. And also, you know, the grace that God has given me. And I went full time at Lifeway months before that happened, not knowing at all that I would need that. My grandson was born months before, and he has been who we needed. He's a funny little guy. And
He's good recreation.
Yes, makes us laugh nonstop, and God knew that we would need him. So so that's been, a lot of the healing has come as a result of the graces that God has really poured out in my life. But I did take a year away from the teaching ministry that God had given me very purposefully. But even in that year, my pastor had a last minute ask for me to teach. He asked 8 months in, I guess. He said, if you're not ready, you're not ready. But I would like for you to consider teaching at this widow's banquet, and deacons were going to be in attendance. It was like 150 people that would be there. And my first reaction internally was, heck no, because it was going to be on Valentine's Day. You know, I mean, like, no. But I didn't say that out loud. I said, let me pray about it tonight, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Yeah, tonight. And so what God showed me in those next 24 hours was that this was a room full of people who understood loss. And I could encourage them honestly in that. And maybe in some ways give them something more valuable than a nice meal and some fun decorations, you know? And so I did it. And then another time, just a couple months later, my friend was supposed to speak at a women's event, and she had to leave last minute, had to leave the state. And she said the same thing. She called me up and she said, if you're not ready, you're not ready. We'll work it out. But if you wouldn't mind filling in for me, I would love that. And God used both of those times. He gave me what I could handle as I could handle it. And he used those two events to affirm me in some ways, to help me move forward in some ways, and also to to encourage other people through my hurt under the spotlight of God's word.
Cynthia, I've talked about this a little bit on the show, but I went through some stuff over the last few years that I just couldn't shake, and someone recommended a program to me called the Living Centered Program here in the Nashville area at a facility called Onsite. And they describe it as a hard reset of your emotional system. Mm-hmm. So you go, you check in for 6 days. You cannot call home. You cannot talk to anybody outside. You can only tell people your first name. And it's really a place of complete freedom from everything that people might know about you. All right, I recommend it to you, and you did it. You went and did it.
I did. Mm-hmm.
What were the takeaways?
Yeah.
I know you're probably still processing it.
I am. I had never done therapy before. I had done it before on site in the past 2 years, mm-hmm. but never before that. And I'm kind of a person who's like, a Baptist organization in my state reached out to me and said, hey, we know what has happened and we want to help out. So we want to give you a list of therapists if you want to do that. And I thought, I guess, yeah, I'll probably need some therapy. But I thought, it's part of my list at that time. Uh-huh. And so I'm going to do an intensive, a 3-hour intensive, so I can get the therapy done.
Mm. Yeah, just knock it out.
Knock it out, mark it off the list, and you can't do that, which was weird for me to realize. You don't just mark therapy off of the list. I, after that, saw somebody else for 6 weeks who was an expert in the exact trauma that I was going through. And then on-site was a different thing altogether. Mm-hmm. It was 6 days, and it was, let me turn in my phone and sit on the floor in a circle with complete strangers, and we'll process our stuff in view of each other's stuff.
Yeah.
It's tough. It was really hard work, but it was really good work. When that opportunity was presented to me, because it was a gift, it was a very, very generous gift from people who don't even know me, but had heard my story and wanted to help. Mm-hmm. And also some other people who do know me and wanted to help with the rest of it. But it's a really expensive week of therapy. But I was framing it in the sense of, if God's going to keep giving me these opportunities to write and to teach, then I'm going to need to do a deeper work so that I can help other people.
Right.
I'll go to on-site so that I can help other people. And then 2 days before I went, I was walking with a friend, and I said, what if on-site is just for me? Like, what if God actually loves us that much? And why is that thought just now occurring to me? And so I went with a whole different mindset. I was there just for me. Is God going to use it? Absolutely, for other people. But I don't have to manage that. Mm. And I didn't that week. I just let God do a work in me. One of the biggest pieces of work that I dealt with that week was I really wrestled with the two big events underneath the awareness of God's sovereignty and omniscience. I thought, if you, God, if you knew what was coming next, why did you let the aneurysms be found? Yeah. I've lived a really great life, I thought.
Yeah.
And I know where I'm going. Heaven's going to be great. Why did you let these aneurysms be found?
That's a really brave question.
Yeah, and I said that out loud in the room. And I know all of the answers that people give for that question. I know it intellectually. I know that God still has purpose for me. I know that my kids and my grandson need me. And not only that, they want me in their lives, and I want that too. I knew all of those things. But doing the work, allowing God to do the hard work in me through the hurt, has helped me know it in my heart, not just in my head. It moved from here to here.
I've been going back through the book of Job recently, and it's just amazing how honest he is with God about how he feels about what's happened to him. And when I was going through the on-site process, you have to process two big traumas out loud in front of all these strangers. And you don't realize till you get into it, like just how deep the pain is. It starts to erupt. But the thing that I realized there was I really had a bone to pick with God. Because I felt like not only did I go through some things that were really hurtful, but I felt like he could have stopped it. And I think everybody that's a Christian, you come to a point in your life, you have to wrestle with that. Of you knew you could have stopped it, and why didn't you stop it? And it's not until we really wrestle with those questions. I mean, Job says, I thought I knew you before, but now I really know you.
Yeah.
Until we walk through that, Tozer says it this way, until God wounds a man deeply, he cannot use him greatly. So this wound that you've experienced, I mean, this is one of the hardest stories I've ever heard. You would never have chosen this. You're a miracle that you're still writing Bible studies to me.
Well, and the writing of the Bible studies has been a help to me, you know? I mean, the week after I sat away from work, didn't do any. The Monday that I sat back down to start writing again, I told you I was in that Psalm study, and I opened up the template, and what was right in front of me to work on that day, to write from, was Psalm 51, which is David's confession of his sin of adultery with Bathsheba. And I'm like, are you kidding me, God? I mean, we went straight to it.
It's a little close to home.
Really close to home. After I finished that study, I was tasked with writing Storyteller Ruth and relating entirely to Naomi. I got to plan out that whole study, and the first 2 weeks we sit entirely in chapter 1 because I was in chapter 1 myself, you know, in the hurt. And so, yeah, God has used his word to help me, to heal me. I'm not going to sit here and say I would have been in his word if it wasn't my job in those moments.
Yeah. It tethered you.
It did.
That's one of the things about not being a pastor that's been hard on me, is I've realized how lazy I can get without having that sermon prep.
I've let you know.
Yeah, you have, in very loving ways. But it's tough. Like, and your job really does, in a way, it's a blessing. You know, with a few minutes left here, what would be some encouragement you'd give to someone out there that's not sure that they'll ever have hope like they had it before again?
I know that there are a lot of women in particular who feel like they can't say it out loud. That if it's not a news story, like, I mean, I had to talk about it. I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
But other people do have that choice. Talking about it over and over and over again, while that sounds completely awful, it has been a kindness, because I have worked through it in a kind of a quick way compared to some other people, because I didn't have a choice to not talk about it. And I teach and I write, and everything that I do ministry-wise is adjacent to my stuff.
That's so fascinating you bring that up. We were just having dinner with some friends recently, and their son's going through a lot and some trauma stuff, and he won't talk about it. He's just the personality that just, they cannot get anything out of him. And they just wish he would, because it would at least help him process it. But yeah, I think in ministry, people are afraid to talk about it.
No. And I never wanted this to be my testimony. You know, I mean, who does? Yeah. I didn't want to be everybody else's cautionary tale. But I'm learning to show up in the world as I am, honestly. And as the person God is transforming me to be through the hurt. You know, I have known what Scripture teaches about who God is. I've taught those things for decades. but it's different now. It's not a heady knowledge. It's not untested. It's experiential. And
That's a pretty neat thought, that you have a tested faith.
Absolutely. And I don't think God's promises are true anymore. I know they're true. You know, I know that God is at work before, during, and after suffering and trauma hit. I know that Jesus is present in our hurt. I know the Spirit is at work in our hurt. I know God's Word is the only foundation to really stand on in our hurt. I have seen God's love and His sovereignty and His power and His purpose and His provision continue to be revealed in my life in a time when nearly everything else I thought was true was obliterated in a second. And He's with us in our hurt, and He's good.
And that's part of the answer of why did He let it happen? Because ultimately, we know that faith is the most important thing we have. And with it being untested, it can't grow. So not that we would ever want anyone to go through what you've gone through, but there certainly is on the other side of it the benefit of a really tested faith that's stronger than it was before. Do you have days where you wake up still and just waves of shame, or you're right back in the dark place? I'm sure it's not a linear process.
It isn't. And I've been seeing that phrase a lot lately. Healing isn't linear.
Right.
I don't know who said it first, but I've experienced that is true. There have been times I've been in all 5 stages of grief at once. And again, that's frustrating to me because I'm like, okay, I think I should be checking these off.
Off your list?
Off my
Well,
list.
you're a Bible study writer. You work through projects.
I
Get it
do.
done.
Yeah, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You know,
What
our
do you-
emotions don't work that way.
What do you do on the days where you wake up and you've got nothing? You're empty.
Music's been a really big help to me. Friendship, too. I've always been real intentional about making friends in new places when we've gone to new churches, you know, and it works the same way. I'm not a staff wife anymore, but it works the same way. You know, ask somebody to go to lunch, go to lunch. Ask somebody else to go to lunch, go to lunch again. God uses food to form friendship.
Music, food, and friendship.
Yeah, it's not just Chick-fil-A either. I mean, he uses crepes and queso and even salad sometime to
Did you
help
hear her
us.
say queso? That was the best part of the show
My
so far.
stomach is growling, remember?
That's great.
Okay.
So I've done that.
You reach
now. Yes, and I've been intentional about that in this new space. I have family nearby. I have friends all over who are checking on me regularly. But I realized about 5 months in, I remember a distinct moment when I thought, I need some people with proximity who I can do life with. And within a month, God said, here you go.
That's awesome. Hurt has to be processed with people. You can't just deal with it on your own. And I think women are better at this than men. I saw it the other day. I sent to Lynley that a woman who loses her husband tends to move on in a healthy way with their life, but men who lose their wives struggle because men don't make friendships. We rely almost entirely on our wives at times. And so I learn a lot about friendship from watching Lynley. I talked in the last episode about how you see your college roommates still once a year. Just those enduring friendships.
And men need those friendships.
Yes, they
I
do.
mean, there may be people listening now who are struggling with some sort of addiction. And we all need to talk about our stuff, not just in healing, but in dealing with the stuff.
We isolate when we need to be in community.
Yeah. And I think that if he had ever once said it, the depth of his struggle, which he had been experiencing his whole life and no one knew, if he had ever said it even once, it could have been a different story because he would have gotten help. The people in his life would have made sure of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the show and talking about it. And thank you for helping me with my Bible study. Angie wants us to talk about my Bible study. So let's talk about it for a second.
I worked it in there earlier.
Well, I was amazed what you did with the content I put together, because building a Bible study is so different than writing a sermon. But it's 6 sessions on how the Acts 2 church understood relationships and community, and how our churches today are often friendly, but there's not a lot of friendship. And I love your story. You've been an exception to that. But a lot of people who attend church, they like these people, but they're not really doing life with them. So I had a really good time writing it, but I had an even better time watching how you turned what I had into something really was for a group experience. As you were writing it, what were you thinking about what some of the value would bring to the church? Like, where do you see it really making an impact?
You have a whole chapter about that piece about honesty, right?
Sincerity.
Sincerity, yeah. The believers ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God. And that sincerity part is, I think that a lot of small groups, they want to get together and have a good time. Mm-hmm. And there's no expectation that's deeper than that typically. I've had people in the last few months say, after conversations like, I wish that my small group could have these types of discussions.
Yeah.
It just takes one person being honest and opening up, and then everybody will step into that typically.
Yeah.
But we have to be intentional. It's not going to just happen. What's going to just happen is we're going to talk about the sporting event that just, or a movie or queso or whatever.
That was my favorite chapter to write, because I think it's the thing that's needed the most. Churches do a pretty good job of getting people into groups and figuring out how to, incorporate people into community, but you can lead a horse to water. You can't make him to drink. Somebody has to take a risk in there and say, I'm walking through a really dark thing. And it's like they're afraid to do it. Like, I don't want to bring the whole group down. And yet in that moment is where ministry really starts to happen. And so thank you for working so hard on it. I can't imagine doing what you do. Lynley and I talk about this. I roll paint, but I don't trim. And you trim really, really well. So thanks for the work on it. Can't wait for it to come out.
I was glad I got to partner with you in it.
Yeah.
It was good for me.
It's called Together. You can get it at lifeway.com, and it's a 6-week study on community. It's great for small groups. It's also great for senior pastors who are trying to get their church reactivated in community. I could see a pastor doing like a sermon series on the early church, and then having the groups go through that material to just remember what it was supposed to be like.